Assalamu alaikum everyone and welcome to our national e-invoicing solution, FATOORA. Today we're going to be conducting a technical workshop to go over e-invoicing in general and focus on phase 2 of FATOORA, which is related to the integration phase. In today's session, we're going to go over a quick introduction to e-invoicing, and then we're going to have some recap about e-invoicing models. We're talking about the B2B and B2C. And then we're going to dig deeper into the phase 2 requirements. And then we're going to showcase some of the most common CSID or cryptographic stamp ID business scenarios and how to deal with them. And then finally, we're going to open the floor for some Q&A. So a quick recap about the invoicing and where we stand as we speak. In e-invoicing, we published our first regulation back in December 4th, 2020. After that, in May 2021, we released some implementation resolution, including the controls, the requirements, the technical specifications, and all things related to how the invoicing will be moving forward. In 2001, 4th of December 2001, generation phase, which is phase 1, started to be enforced, which came into effect. And then right now, we're in the phase of announcing the first wave of phase 2, which is going to start enforcement in January 1st of 2023. And now we're going to announce the first wave of the integration phase. So as a quick recap of what's the difference between the phases, what we have on the left-hand side is the generation phase, which was done in the previous year. Again, the whole purpose of the generation was in preparation for the integration phase. So basically, they were all, let's say, taxpayer side preparation. So we wanted to make sure that our taxpayers are ready for the integration moving forward. So we have issued the regulation stating that all invoices has to be generated in electronic format. They all have to be stored in electronic format, and then we have some additional fees that need to be involved or included in the invoices, including the QR code for simplified e-invoices, which is mainly targeting the B2C. Now, moving forward, as we mentioned, now we're in preparation for the integration phase, phase 2. Here, we're going to expand more on top of the generation phase requirement. So basically, here we are going to enforce the format of the invoice or the e-invoice. We're going to make sure that the invoices are generated as per standard, which is an XML format or a PDF/A with an embedded XML. To the invoice. And mainly we're talking about some security features, including the cryptographic stamp. And then finally, one of the major requirements in the integration phase is actually integrating with Zapka platform for clearance, which is B2B, and we're going to have a look at the model there. And then the reporting, which is the B2C. So moving forward, who will be subject to the implementation of phase 2 requirements? As we mentioned previously, the phase 2 requirements is going to be enforced in waves. Right now, we're announcing wave 1 of our taxpayers to be included in the first wave. Of course, any taxpayer is going to be notified about that. We're going to give them a head start of at least 6 months for them to prepare for the integration. We understand the taxpayer environment might be complicated. They might need some time. So we dedicated at least 6 months in advance for them to prepare their systems and their environment in general. Now, again, as a general set of requirements for phase 2, what we're talking about is that we need to make sure that the taxpayer systems that are generating the e-invoices are connected to the internet. We need to make sure that the invoice format has additional field requirements, as we mentioned in our specification. And then, as we mentioned previously, it has to be in the format that we require, which is an XML or PDF/A3 embedded XML. It has to be generated and stored in the same format. And then finally, they have to integrate with Zapka platform and share the invoices. Of course, you can find more details about this in the detailed general guideline. Now, moving forward to the models, as we mentioned, we have 2 major models. We have the simplified invoices, and we have here like a sample invoice, how it will look like. Now, the simplified invoices are generally targeted toward the B2C or business to consumers or to customers, while we have the regular tax or the standard tax invoices, which is generally targeted between business to business or B2B. Now, looking deeper into the B2B and how the workflow would look like for the integration phase. So basically, the supplier has to generate the invoice locally in their machine, and then they have to send it to Zatka platform. Zatka platform in return is going to clear the e-invoice and then generate a QR code and a stamp on the invoice itself, and then send it back to the supplier. Once it is sent back with the clearance, meaning that the QR code has been generated by Zatka and the stamp has been stamped by Zatka, then the supplier will have the ability to share the cleared invoice with their buyer. Of course, the way that they are shared, of course, has to be XML or PDF/3. However, they can agree on whichever format that they want to share, whether it's paper-based or an electronic based. This is something between the supplier and buyer. We're not dictating anything like that. Now, since we're introducing the QR code as part of the invoice fields, the buyer has the ability to verify the invoice and make sure that it has been cleared by Zatka by scanning the QR code using Zatka mobile app. Now here we have a closer look on the invoice fields. We have highlighted some of the fields that we have. So first of all, we have the invoice type. So this is the FATOORA ضريبية, which is the tax invoice. This is the B2B. We have the reference number of the invoice. We have the seller information, part of the invoice itself. We have the taxable amounts, which is mentioned here. We have the total, the taxable amount, and then the total as well. On the left-hand side, we have the QR code. We need to add the date and time, which is the timestamp of the invoice that was generated. We have some seller information that is required. Mainly, we're talking about the commercial registration number of the seller. We have also the buyer information. Since this is the B2B, we need to capture the buyer information, and maybe we're talking about the taxation number of that. And then finally, we have the subtotal, as we mentioned previously. Now, having said that, let's have a look at the B2C model of the invoicing, which is what we call the simplified tax invoice. So the supplier from their machine will be able to generate and share the e-invoice in a human readable format, as we've seen in the pictures before, with their customer. Now, in return, the taxpayer or the supplier has to store the invoice generated by the machine locally in their machine in the format that we said, which is XML or PDF/3 with embedded XML. And then finally, the seller has to share all generated invoices to Zatka platform, and we are giving a grace period of 24 hours for them to share this invoice. We understand how time sensitive the B2C business transaction, so we're giving a grace period of 24 hours for the taxpayers to share the invoices. Now, similarly, as we see in the B2B, in the B2C as well, you're going to have a QR code printed on the invoice. The customer will have the ability to scan the QR code using Zatka app to validate the invoice and make sure that it is in the correct format. Here is also a closer look at the simplified invoice template. Most of them are existing fields. However, the blue one, which is the QR code, this will be an updated QR code to have additional fields. Basically, they are security fields, and more details can be found in the detailed guidelines that are available on our website. Now, let's dig deeper into phase 2 requirements. What does it entail, and what does it require from our taxpayers to make sure that they are phase 2 compliant with Zatka regulation? So, in terms of material, we have published 4 documents related to the resolution. So we have the e-invoicing resolution itself. We have data dictionary before the data fields and their definitions and how to be used and the formats. We also published the XML implementation standard. And then we have the security features implementation, which also include the QR code. And then we have the API specification Swagger file. We're going to have a look at it in this presentation. Next, we have provided some tools to our taxpayers to make sure that their solutions are ready to be integrated. So we have released a compliance and enablement toolbox in the form of an SDK. software development kit. It can be downloaded locally at your machines, and then you can test the invoices and make sure that they are compliant with Zatka requirements. We have also availed an integration sandbox, sandbox.zatka.gov.sa, which will give you more features, more tools to integrate actually and shoot some APIs towards Zatka platform to test the compatibility of your application development. Then finally, we have released some additional material, which is basically the QR code, how to develop it in a much cleaner format. You'll have a QR code development guide published right now on our website. Having a look from a taxpayer who is subject to phase 2, there are 4 main steps that the taxpayer can take. The first 2 are optional. However, we do recommend to go through them. And then the last 2, which are 3 and 4, are actually mandatory. So the first step that the taxpayer has to undertake, which is to confirm the ability to generate compliant e-invoices. So they need to make sure that from their point of view, from their system side, they're able to actually generate compliant e-invoices in XML format. So this is the first step that they need to do. And we're going to have a deeper look at this. Secondly, they'll need to confirm that they are able to actually integrate with Zatka system. And this is where the sandbox or the integration sandbox that we mentioned previously, this is where it will come in effect. Taxpayers will be able to test their environment and integrate actually with Zatka platform and call the APIs and see the responses from our APIs and make sure that they are compliant. Now, these are optional. They can be done optional. However, we highly recommend to make sure that you don't go further unless you make sure that your system is compliant and able to integrate with Zatka platform. The next step is to onboard and register e-invoice generation solution, EGS units. And this is actually mandatory for any unit that is generating an e-invoice has to be onboarded individually. And we're going to have a closer look at that. Of course, this step can also be automated, and we'll see this further in the presentation. And then finally, once the EGS units are onboarded in our platform, you'll be able to send the invoices, whether they are invoices, debit or credit notes, for clearance and reporting, which is B2B and B2C. So these are the major 4 steps that any taxpayer has to undertake for them to make sure that they are phase 2 ready. Now, let's have a closer look at step number 1. So first of all, as we mentioned, that the taxpayer can verify from their side if their system is generating a compliant XML e-invoices. And to do that, we have 2 options. The first option is to go to the developer portal, which is sandbox.zatka.gov.sa. You'll be able either to download an offline version of our SDK, and then they're going to use it through a command line, or they can integrate it in their IDE to make sure to run the commands within their code. The second option in the developer portal is actually a portal-based validator, where taxpayer will be able, or the developers will be able to drag and drop some XMLs, and they can get immediate validation about these XMLs in a web format. Now, the second way to access the same SDK, which is actually through our external portal, zatka.gov.sa, we have dedicated a system developer page on our website. There we'll find some documentation, some tools, and one of the tools is actually the SDK. And again, similar to the first one, you'll be able to either integrate it into your code, or you can use a command line to validate and make sure that the invoices, the standard and simplified invoices that your system is generating, is compliant. Here we've included like high-level steps on how we can do that. Of course, all the details are provided in the in our website or on the developer portal. Some highlights for that is basically you have to have the SDK has to have or your environment has to have Java version between 11 and 15 to run. You also have a command which is FATOORA-help to give you some more information about all the commands and the inputs and outputs for each command command that we have within the SDK. We have some sample commands which is used within the SDK. So here we have the FATOORA validate. So here we're validating a standard invoice in an XML, of course. So basically, you're going to run FATOORA-validate-invoice and then space and then the file. And then you're going to get a reply on the command line saying that whether it is done successfully or not. Also, part of the commands is actually signing an invoice. As we know that in phase 2, we have some security features embedded in our model. So you'll be able to test the signage of the invoices on the using the SDK. So we're going to run the command FATOORA-sign-invoice and then the file name. They're going to find an output of the actual hash or the actual sign of the XML printed out in the SDK, and also we're going to find the actual certificate in this folder, which is data/certificates. Here's another sample for how to sign an invoice again. So basically, you run the command FATOORA-sign-invoice request-invoice with the standard invoice XML that you have generated. You'll find all the results in the command line. Again, all the details we're going to find on our documentation. Finally, here we have a sample of how to generate a private key and a CSR. Again, we're going to run the command FATOORA-CSR configuration file output. So here you have the path of the CSR file that you have, and then you will have the output and the second parameter, which is this one. You'll have the key outputted there. This is an example of how the private key would look like eventually. Again, we have a sample here of how to convert a compliance or a production CSID to PM format. So basically, we're going to run this command. We're going to receive this response to the command line, and then finally, this is the actual EC private key output that we're going to receive. So this concludes step 1 and how you'll be able to test your XML files, whether it's an offline or an online manner. Next, we have the integration part, which is using the Sandbox. So the way to use the Sandbox, basically, we're going to go to our developer portal, which is sandbox.zapka.gov.sa. They're able to register, and then they're going to be able to view all the API documentations. We have a list of APIs that you're going to be needing to integrate with our platform. Of course, they are in Swagger format, so you'll be able to test them on the portal itself, or you can integrate system to system, of course. So we have the list of 6 APIs. We have the compliance CSID API. We're going to have a closer look at them. We have the compliance checks APIs. We have the production CSID API. This is used for onboarding. And similarly, we have the renewal part as well. Finally, we have 2 APIs for actually submitting the invoices. One is in the reporting API format, and then the other one is for clearance. And then we'll be able to simulate these integration codes using direct links to our system. So here we have a description of all these 6 APIs that we have seen before. So basically, the first API, which is the compliance CSID API, this is used to submit a test CSR, which is certificate signed request, to test Zapka backend system as a part of the onboarding or renewal process. So this step is a pre-step needed for the onboarding. Next step is you need to call the compliance checks APIs. This API is used to test the compliance of a test device or solution unit. This is also part of the onboarding or renewal process. And then next, you need to call the production CSID API for onboarding. This is when you want to onboard an individual unit. This API will be used to submit a test request ID to test Zapka backend system. This is also part of the API process. And this is the final step, actually. Then you'll be able to either report or clear, or both, of course, depending on the type of invoices that the system is generating. Now, of course, the certificate that you have for CSID will have an expiry date. So we also introduced an API to do renewal, an automatic renewal from the system to automate the renewal part of the certificates. Here we have introduced some more information about the SSR. What does the CSR entail? So we have certain fields that need to be taken into consideration. They need to be there for for the CSR request to be successful. We have the common name. This is basically this is something for the taxpayer to identify the unit. So it can be like a unit name or an asset tracking number of the solution itself. This will help the taxpayer to identify individual units. We have the EGS or invoicing generating solution serial number. This is something that is automatically filled. This is not something that the taxpayer has to fill manually. This is based on the manufacturer or the solution provider name. We also have the organization identifier, UID. This is the VAT registration number or the VAT of the group VAT registration number. Also, we have the organization unit name. This is the OU. This is the organization unit name. Also, we have the organization name. This is the actual taxpayer name. Of course, we have all the accepted inputs and the type of input that are requested, whether they are manual or automated. Next, we have the country name. This is the country name of the taxpayer. We also have the invoice type. So we have multiple inputs or parameters that are expected here. So this document that the taxpayer solution will be using to issuing or generating can be one or a combination of standard invoice, simplified invoice. For future use, we have a C, and then for future use. So this is basically will identify that what type of invoices that this solution will be generating. So in the first field, if you have it false, this means that it is, if you have it T, it means that it's a tax invoice, which is standard or degree. If it has S, then it's a simplified invoice. And if it is C, this is C or Z, this is something that we're reserving for future use. And then we have here an example, which is 1100. So it is true, true, and then false, false. This means that this solution is going to generate a standard invoice and a simplified invoice at the same time. We also have some information about the location, which is the free text, and then we're talking about the industry, which is a free text as well. These are some of the steps that you need to create an open SSL configuration file. Again, this is one of the prerequisites to create a CSR. I'm going to pause here for a minute just to give you to have a look at how these CSR. Again, these are all the fields that we have seen previously. This is just a sample how to do it. So what's need to be is you only need to update the yellow fields only. The white ones are actually presets. No need to change them. Right. Next, once you have that file created, then what you need to do is you need to create a private key using ECDSA 256 algorithm. This command will output a file called private key.pem. This is how the command would look like, and this is the output that we have seen previously in the examples. Next step, what you need to do is, once you have that in PEM format, you need to create or generate a certificate signing request, which is CSR. So basically, we're going to open the command line, write this command, and you can see here we're passing the private key that we have created in the previous step. This is the expected output of a CSR command. So in our example, we're going to name it as taxpayer.csr. And then what you need to do is you need to encode it in base 64. So basically, you're going to pass the taxpayer.csr that we've seen in the previous slide, and then you're going to have the final result, which is in base 64 encoding. So this concludes the way that we're going about integration, how to use the integration sandbox along with all the APIs. Again, the website is sandbox.zarka.gov.sa. This is our integration sandbox portal. Now, moving forward, once you make sure that you're generating a compliant XMLs, and then you tested your integration and make sure that all the API codes are correct, then you'll be able to actually onboard and register the individual devices that you have. So the journey would look like something like this. So as a taxpayer, you need to log in into a different portal, which we call FATOORA portal, FATOORA.zarka.gov.sa. In this portal, you need to log in with your taxpayer credentials, and then in there, you'll be able to onboard up to 100 devices at once. So basically, you're going to request for each device an OTP, which is a one-time password, and then each individual device you need to put an OTP for that device and continue the steps that we have seen previously. Now, these two steps can be automated through APIs. If your solution can support automation, then we can simulate the whole thing through automation. It doesn't need any manual intervention. Once you have done this step, so basically you're gonna use the steps that we have seen previously in the integration sandbox. Basically, you need to generate the CSR, and then you need to go through some compliance checks, meaning that you need to send a sample standard document for clearance if your device is creating a standard invoice. And for simplified, we're going to do the same. And then if your device is doing both, meaning that your device will generate standard and simplified invoices, then you need to send sample for each one. Once the compliance check is done, then we're going to have a certified device, so the certificate will be obtained and the device will be considered onboarded. So these are the APIs that we mentioned that you need to go through. Compliance CSID API, then the checks, and then the production CSID for onboarding. This is the final step. And then, as we mentioned before, for renewal, once or when device certificate is about to expire, then you need to use this API to renew the certificate. So by the end of the step, your device is onboarded, and now they can be used to send actual production invoices. Here we have a screenshot about from FATOORA portal. So as we mentioned, it's FATOORA.zalka.gov.sa. So this is, for example, we're having an example of onboarding like 16 devices. So each device will have an OTP. So you need to enter this OTP in the unit and then continue the CSR and then the compliance checks to complete the onboarding steps. Here we have included some samples from Postman against the Sandbox API. So again, this is a sample of how to request compliance CSID using base64 for the CSR and the OTP received, of course. So as you can see here in the parameters that we are passing, we're passing the OTP that we have generated through FATOORA portal to continue the onboarding process. Here, after the onboarding, we're providing a sample of how to send a series of simplified invoices. Of course, every invoice will be sent to Zalka is going to be recorded individually. Similarly, we have a sample for standard invoices. This is used for clearance. Of course, we're talking about the invoice, debit or credit notes. This is also an example of how to use the APIs. This is a sample of requesting a production CSID. So this is actually once the compliance checks are done, the final step, as we mentioned before, is that you need to request a production CSID. This will actually finalize the onboarding process. So by the end of that, your device is onboarded and it's ready to start sending invoices or e-invoicing to Zalka platform. This is basically so your EGS can now send through the reporting API or clearance APIs, the e-invoicing that you're generating, whether they are standard or simplified. Of course, our solution is going to do some validation and then stamping, thus adding the QR code. This is, of course, for standard documents. For non-standard or B2C, this is not a required step. This is not performed. We have also now included some of the most common CSID business scenarios. So we noticed that we received some questions saying which devices need to have CSID. So we included some of the most common ones. So the most simple one is that if the taxpayer has a single server that is generating an invoice, basically only this server is sending an invoice to our e-invoicing platform. Now, as a general rule of thumb, any device that is either issuing an e-invoice or sending an e-invoice to Zalka platform has to have a CSID. And from the example that we'll be going through now, we're going to find that this statement stands true. So as we mentioned, this is the most simple, let's say, model where we have a single taxpayer server that is generating and sending the invoices is the one that is required to have a CSI. Another example is that we have, let's say, multiple branches for our taxpayers. Each one have a different point of sale, and each one of them are actually generating and sending an invoice to Zatka platform. So each of these individual point of sale will require to have a CSID. So they have to go through all the steps that we have seen previously, from sending the compliance checks, the CSR requests, and all these things to make sure that each individual device has a compliant or a production-ready CSID. The next example here is that if we have a centralized server, this one is actually used for issuing and sending the invoices, and we have point of sale machines. These ones are communicating with this server to issue the invoice. So these individual machines are not actually issuing the invoices. No, it's the central machine that is generating that. So here we don't need the point of sale machines to have CSID. Only the server that is issuing and sending the invoices will require to have a CSID. Now, similarly, if these individual point of sale machines actually are generating the invoice and then sending them again for consolidation, so each one of them will require to have a CSID individually. In addition to that, the machine that will be sending to Zatka, so you understand that not all models will have each individual point of sale connected to Zatka. No, we will have like some sort of consolidation server where we'll have all the invoices populated or sent to a central server, and this server will be able to send it to Zatka server for the final submission. So here, since these individual machines are actually issuing the invoice, then they have to have the CSID. And similarly, since this one is sending the invoice to Zatka, then this also will have to have a CSID. Here, a bit of a complex example. This is where we have, let's say, multiple branches with local servers. So each point of sale is connected to a local server in the branch, for example. These point of sales are not actually generating the invoice. The invoices are being generated or issued through the branch server. So the point of sale don't need to have a CSID, only the issuing server. Now, some of the models we have that each branch is actually connected to a central, let's say, a repository or a server to consolidate all the invoices. So, and this one is sending the invoices to Zatka platform. So this central machine also have to have a CSID, production-ready CSID to send the invoices to Zatka.